What's good, everybody? Haven't seen you guys since before the Super Bowl. Phil Murphy here alongside my good pal, Laurie Horesh. Laws were separated by what did we calculate? 15,000 kilometers thereabouts. But you and I, very close this past week as we're talking draft prospects we like, team needs, and I said this on SportsCenter today. It's the one time in the NFL, it's 32 versus 32, where you have bitter rivals sometimes collaborating together for the mutual good. Everybody has hope. Everybody has a sense of optimism in the glass half full. And then the picks happen and trades happen. And we try and overlay need with selection versus prospect versus other options therein. And man, the dust is still settling. We're still getting trade specifics for some of these teams. How are you situated, buddy? And by the way, anybody who's tuning in, we are live. It is nearly 1 a.m. here, where I live, halfway between Boston and New York. It is, well, we're a Brekkie show, but we'll call it a lazy brunch, 2:30 in the afternoon. So fire away with your questions. I can't see them. Laurie can. He'll get them, popped up on screen as they come. Phil, great to see you again. Hey, I'm not going to clown on Laurie off the bat. We'll be talking about Dallas's pick, so I will be utilizing my jab then with their draft
The beads
selection.
are here, Phil. The beads are here. I haven't spoken yet, but the
Are
beads
those
are here.
rosary beads? What are they? Do you need some prayer? Oh, okay. Well, you should have maybe thought about some rosary beads with how things went. Laz, how are you going? How are you going, buddy? Not Dallas in particular. We'll get there. But the first round as a whole, 31 picks. The Dolphins, of course, forfeiting there. So 31 picks in this first round. How have you digested all of it?
Well, it's not a tradition unlike any other. That belongs to a different sporting event. But there's certainly a yearly tradition in the lead up to the draft where all the insiders are saying the same thing. And that is, not all the insiders. A lot of insiders are saying the same thing. This is going to be chaos. This is going to be crazy. This is the most unpredictable draft. There's no consensus across teams. No, there's a huge gap between what the league thinks and what media scouts and the public think. This is going to be surprises galore. And you go, okay, all right. Like, we've heard that before. Sometimes it comes off, and sometimes you and me are texting each other 16 picks into the draft going, well, this is pretty chalk. Going with all the surprises of, an early Rugby World Cup group stage match between, some smaller nation and the All Blacks. But this one was exactly that. Top 10 picks, chaos, quarterbacks going off the board, trades, 3 trades in the top 10. And I think I'm going out a limb here. We can check with the ESPN stats and info, but I think for the first time in history, we had a team pick back-to-back in the top 10, followed by a team completing trades back-to-back, all in the same top 10. I can't imagine that has ever happened before. Maybe, look, there used to be like 97 rounds in the NFL draft, so who knows? But in the top 10 of the draft, to see the Houston Texans, after all the noise that they were trying to get out, they didn't want a quarterback, this, and this. They select a pretty chalky pick in CJ Stroud, second overall. Then they make the big move up to number 3 to get Will Anderson, the Alabama edge rusher. And then we see Arizona, the trade partner there, moving from 3 back out to 12, down to 6.
Which, Laz, if I may interject, the calculus by Monty Ossenfort, first-year Cardinals GM, first draft, he showed up and started playing 4D chess.
This show could be called the Full Monty for what he put on. It was unbelievable. Monty, act like you've been there
completely aside. Let me give the specifics. Arizona was keen on a few positions. They needed an edge rusher, anything along the defensive line, needed a cornerback. None of those they were really going to get at 3 at the proper value, especially given the red flags around Jalen Carter. So they trade back to 12, picking up a first rounder next year and a third rounder this year. Brilliant. Then they see that their offensive lineman that not only they liked, but their franchise quarterback against whom they have like $90 million of dead cap space was very keen on, called the front office and said, hey, if you can figure out a way to get this guy today, do it. They trade up from 12 to 6. And all they forfeited was a fourth this year and 5th this year. So what happened is they go from 3 and 34 this year to 6 this year, 33 this year, and a first-round pick next year that belongs to the Houston Texans, who probably aren't going to be very good. That could be a top 10 pick. Bravo. That was the move of the draft.
And they get the guy that they wanted anyway.
They got him anyway.
They wanted anyway. Like Paris Johnson being that man. This is This was outstanding. First time GM, first year with the Cardinals, and the Cardinals have had a tumultuous run since it appeared they'd stumbled onto an MVP in Kyler Murray, who was, under the previous regime, and Cliff Kingsbury. How many times you and me came on here on a Tuesday morning brekkie and would talk about how all it seemed that the whole game plan seemed to be let Kyler make stuff up. That's when the offense worked. Will kind of be banal and bland for a while, for 2.5, 3 quarters. And then we'll just say, hey, Kyler, can you go make some stuff up? Now we're seeing phenomenal front office work paired with clearly a symbiotic and in partnership relationship with Kyler Murray in terms of the assets they acquire, the teammates and the protection to beef up that offensive line. So I think off the top, the top 10 really delivered. And then, of course, the Eagles, no, it didn't go their way in the Super Bowl, in a historic Super Bowl and a thoroughly entertaining affair, but they were always coming into this draft having locked up Jalen Smith to a monster $50+ million a year contract. Sorry, Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts.
I know you're still on the Notre Dame.
Now, it's draft day, so the memories of Jalen Smith, they do come back a little too quick. So they lock up Jalen Hurts to the big long-term deal. They've got the 2 first-round picks, and they make their move inside the trade, inside the top 10, to make sure that they weren't going to get jumped, unlike other teams in the NFC East, to make sure they won't get jumped. They move up from 10 to 9, give up, a day 3 pick. The Chicago Bears must have known, hey, who are you guys taking? Oh, okay, we're not going to take Jalen Carter as he slides. We're going to slide back. Savvy, just clean business move there from both sides of that. They could jump up, grab Jalen Carter to stick next to his former defensive tackle rotation and on-field partner in Jordan Davis, so you just got ridiculous power and explosion in the middle of that Philadelphia Eagles defensive line. And then they come back at pick 30, and one of possibly my favorite player in the draft, Nolan Smith, edge, outside linebacker, overhang defender, whatever you want to do with him. Incredibly athletic, incredibly tough, physical, outstanding football character, athletic traits, like huge upside as a pass rusher that hasn't been tapped into yet. For someone who's around the 240-pound mark, 6'2", you would think, oh, this is a speed guy. This would just be pass rush, and then you just run at him and take him out of the game. It's actually the flip for him. He has the athleticism for that. But what he actually excels at is the take on, the physicality, the hustle, the motor, the run defense, the power game, what he presents. And they land him at pick 30. Look, I know it's Athens and not Atlanta, but all that came to mind when that pick happened was welcome to Atlanta. That's what kept running in my mind of the Eagles' defensive room.
Well, Philadelphia is a Greek word, is it not? And Athens, obviously, is a Greek city. So we should have seen the pipeline coming there. Credit to Philadelphia. It's why that they were able to go to the Super Bowl, win it, completely rebuild the roster, sans like 6 guys, and get back there again and be a contested penalty and just time running out on the clock away from winning it again. They give up a first half defensive touchdown that kind of changed the game. But yeah, man, they know how to draft, and for an interior defensive lineman with red flags like Jalen Carter has had. He had a nightmare pre-draft process from, being questioned in a tragedy that claimed 2 lives in a reckless driving incident. He showed up at the combine overweight, didn't test well, had a kind of small injury there, looked like he'd put on some weight. A guy with all the physical tools. You want to put him in a right scenario? Okay, well, you have his senior leader and captain Jordan Davis from last year in college and Fletcher freaking Cox. Those are your 2 starters to take that young man under his wing. And then you put, Nolan Smith as an edge rusher. And you're right. He's not just an edge rusher. He uses his first step quickness to wreak havoc against the run. And oh, by the way, he runs a 4.39. There are 0 edge rushers in the NFL below 240 pounds at my last check. However, you can put 5, 7, 10 pounds on him if you're worried and not compromise too much of his quickness. You see on tape, he pops at Georgia, as most of them do. A great Daniel Jeremiah tweet popped up recently from like 2.5 years ago, and he said, watching Georgia tape, draft all of them, just draft all of them. And Philly took that to heart, man. 4 guys in the last 2 drafts. Howie Roseman knows what he likes. And Nakobe Dean, if not for an injury, had a first-round grade last year. They get him in round 3, and now he's the starting middle. He's the Mike linebacker for them. So the Eagles in an offseason, they have 9 guys with 700 defensive snaps last year. and 5 of them are now on different teams. Not ideal, but it happens to teams of that caliber often. They were so reliant on not just the run game, but people forget they led the NFL by a wide margin in sacks. Now you get a guy who could come in. It would surprise nobody if Nolan Smith had 6 or 7 sacks as a rookie next season. They get 2 guys in the defense, and now you're creating a team that has a lot of camaraderie. They could have 4 starters next season at any point who are from the University of Georgia. So Philadelphia fans should be very happy as they look to be the first repeat NFC East champion since 2004.
Sometimes it feels like some teams are just a little too good at this. For years and years, the saying was, why do the good players constantly fall to Ozzie Newsome and the Baltimore Ravens? Why? It seemed like the draft gods always lined up for them. And lately you look at the Philadelphia Eagles and Howie Roseman and what they're doing there. And they have a clear philosophy, right? We're going to draft the trenches. We're going to draft those positions early and often and build out. And we spend certain months of the year, you're going into February, March, free agency. How are they going to hold on to everybody? How can they possibly, retain everybody? Look who the veterans are going out the door, and yet here we are. The secondary had been retained. They brought back some of the veterans up front, the likes of Jason Kelsey, and then they just replenish that ferocious pass rush. What did they have last year? Was it 40, 50, 60, 70 sacks last year? And then you're just going to throw that type of, should we say, kerosene on the fire there? Yeah. All right.
And Lars, to follow up on your point, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the day 3 pick they gave up to move up that spot is from next year's draft. They didn't even, because this year they go like 125 picks they go from 94 to 219 without a selection. And so to give up a 4th round pick next year to move up a spot, you do it. And they did it. And we saw later in the first round, other teams be willing to do that, go up a spot or 2 in the first round to get the guy you want and not be stuck like the Jets were, unfortunately, where, okay, there's a run on edge rushers. We don't get who we want. Or you and I postulated the Cowboys might not have taken the guy they took had all the tight ends been available to them. You see the value of saying, hey, day 3 flyer, we're okay. And then a team like the Bears that has money, to spend, they have draft capital. They knew who they wanted. They knew what they wanted at offensive line. They had options, even if, I agree with you. I think they knew Jalen Carter was going to be the choice there, but even had it been a Darnell Wright, Peter Skronsky, okay, we'll just go interior offensive line, a guy who was a tackle at Northwestern down the road in Evanston, Illinois, but projects as the guard. They were savvy there just to basically get a free pick in next year's draft, a free flyer for them. So by and large, teams, I think we kind of nodded our head at where things went. Zay Flowers, a perfect pick for the Ravens. And oh, by the way, man, biggest acquisition of the day happened hours before the draft, around 6 a.m. your time. It's on the ticker. What chaos did we just?
Don't reach that far on the ticker, Phil. It's over to your side.
I got you, buddy. I got you. It's right there. $185 million guaranteed. Look, we can debate. Maybe now's not the time. Maybe it is. Was the decision not to get an agent validated in getting this deal across the line? I don't know, man. The guy's now got $260 million, and it would have cost him $6 or $7 million had he had an agent. And maybe that would have been $6 or $7 million more, or more money guaranteed. I don't know. But the important thing for the Ravens today, it got done. Everything's water under the bridge. And then, hey, look, at the 22nd pick, we get functionally our choice of receiver, Zay Flowers, a guy who's going to complement Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham Jr. very well in a receiving core that needs it.
There's no debate about paying Lamar as far as I'm concerned. They absolutely should have done that. Happy to see him back in Baltimore, especially as we mentioned. And last time we were speaking, Todd Monken coming on as a, downfield, bombs away, light it up. Offensive coordinator who saw the heights. If you're looking for the theme or the style of Monken offense, think of the high points of the Fitz Magic era down there in Tampa Bay. That's what you can expect from that move to that type of offense, away from what we saw with Greg Roman in Baltimore for so long. You think you get Rashad Bateman back healthy, Odell Beckham Jr., Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and then throw in someone like Zay Flowers, who has that level of urgent athleticism to the way he plays the game. But the rest, if we go through, and you can see the ticker rolling along there, and savvy move from this isn't an Eagles show, believe it or not, with what's hanging around, the beads that are hanging around my neck, but the savvy move there, because if you do look back into the 20s and what happened with a lot of moving around at that 24, 25, 26 pick, and the picks immediately behind, when you look at what position the Cowboys are in with such obvious needs at somewhere like tight end, I think coming out of the NFL Combine, which is a huge meetup for the league and so much information, future trades, future moves, draft, murmurs and inklings start to make their way out. Immediately after, you saw on ESPN, you saw across a whole bunch of draft analysts coming out of there that the Cowboys were being mocked tight end, straight out of the Combine to match the need that we could all see on paper. So the fact that they had the Giants right in front of them probably didn't help, because it was such an obvious spot where the Giants were like, yeah, well, sure, we'll move back and do the dirty on one of our NFC East rivals. Buffalo, you want to come up? Even if it wasn't tight end, there was so much talk. Could Bijan really slide to the mid-20s? If that had happened as well, you're looking at teams like the Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals that could have leapt up. But sparing that for a second, if we go to the top 10 and we peel back and just run through.
I do want to say it was crazy that we had 3 trades in the top 9, including the Cardinals being involved in 2 of them. But at 9, a lot of this starts to become kind of conflated thinking. Because you look at ESPN's rankings versus PFF versus NFL Draft versus The Athletic. Everybody has the Draft Network. A lot of people are putting good content out there. And I think as a fan of the NFL, it's great because you can start to see, are we taking, what kind of angles are we taking? How are we evaluating these? How are we taking in this content? I actually create kind of a composite score from these ranking services. And with that, the composite score that I had, the top 9 guys taken were the top, not in order, but through 9, 1 through 9, the composite score was gone. So whilst the media tends to get a little heat and draft experts and evaluators, many of whom the NFL ultimately hires, Louis Riddick famously interviewing for the Steelers vacancy at GM last year, it was pretty much what we thought in terms of who went where in that top 9. Not those guys going toward the top. Then we started getting a little cheeky with the running backs, not Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then some reaches. One of whom was Jack Campbell. I think it needs to be said. I ultimately at some point in this show do want to praise the Seattle Seahawks, but I also want to raise a question to the Detroit Lions, a team that you and I, they were our darlings last year. That for a lot of people, they played a lot of fun football. Their draft picks came together. I mean, beyond Aiden Hutchinson, Malcolm Rodriguez had a terrific season. James Houston IV, once he got healthy, he was wreaking havoc. Kirby Joseph, the safety out of Illinois, outstanding. For the needs they have, they go running back at 12, RB2 for most, and a middle linebacker at 18, Jack Campbell. Okay, Alex Anzalone needs some assistance there as the Mike linebacker, and Jack Campbell has the name of a Mike linebacker. He has the build of a Mike linebacker. He's 6'5". He's not going to blow you away with his ability to hit the hole and create tackles for loss. That's not his game. But he had a second-round grade for everybody. Mm-hmm. What do you think's going on in Detroit, buddy?
I don't know. This was, as you mentioned, they were a darling of football Twitter. A lot of, analytics-minded and pundits and commentators, journalists and football fans out there loved. They were the second favorite team for a lot of people out there. And this was as old school as it gets. This was Dan Campbell tapping into perhaps the old style football, hardened football guy that he is, because we're talking Jahmyr Gibbs, who awesome running back, incredibly explosive, great speed, really dynamic receiver as well. Interesting option on third down.
Are we going one running back per down? Is that what we're doing?
Having just invested in David Montgomery, it's a little bit of a confusing process of asset allocation, asset management there. Love the player. I thought more, is this a conversation that starts in the 20s, especially with some of those running back needy teams when you looked at, the Buffalo Bills of the world, or perhaps the Cincinnati Bengals with what's going on with Joe Mixon? Is that where we start to get in the conversation? Or, look what's going on with Austin Eckler with the Chargers, Minnesota Vikings, Dalvin Cook and his future with the team. That was early, especially with the positional value of the running back. And then to a positional, if there's a running back correspondent on the defensive side of the ball in terms of positional value because of the toll that goes on these players, it's linebacker, it's off-ball linebacker. It's very confusing. I think for a lot of people that had high hopes of where this could go, they were in position multiple times to take a quarterback who could sit behind Jared Goff a couple of times for a year, or a couple of seasons or a year. They were in all sorts of positions to make more high value additions to the team with this bounty of resources they had, the double first round pick.
Receiver, Jamison Williams is suspended. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is a breakout. Your wide receiver 2 is going to be Marvin Jones for the first third of a season, and wide receiver 3, Josh Reynolds. Every receiver was on the board at 18.
Look, the depth of tight end in this class is fantastic, but they also have a need at tight end after the TJ Hawkinson move. Would that have been, in a trade back scenario? Could they have looked at the Dalton Kincaid at that point? Michael Mayer still on the board. Doesn't hear his name called on day one, which is a bit of a surprise. And it murmurs at some point that Dallas were about to jump up and take Sam Laporta at pick 26. That had my heart going a little racy. Iowa is tight end university. And this is a tough man that comes from that strong line. When you think of the Hawkinsons and the Kittles of the world that have come out, but that would have been a little rich blood for me. But the Lions certainly get. Look, we're not here to grade. You can't truly. We don't know how these draft classes are going to pan out. Come have a look at what I had to say about Tyler Smith this time last year. And then he has. Oh, look, and that's why maybe I'll be a little more measured when we do get to pick 26 later in the show. But it's it's reckless to, we just got comments coming in about the widespread need for certain positions around the league, but I'm going to leave that one pass through. Twitter, always an interesting spot for comments. But back to the Lions, it's just, you circle back to what the opportunity presented here to take their regime forward, their roster forward, and the positions that they'd spent on, both with recent free agency at running back and then linebacker, having a guy like Malcolm Rodriguez. No, it's not the same position, as Jack Campbell. They can play different roles, but you got him so late in the draft. You know what you can find late on. Is this the best linebacker draft? No, but there are generally athletes and interesting, tough prospects that you can find on day 2 and day 3 at that position. Not all together unlike running back.
And they have 3 second-round picks, 34, 48, and 55. So perhaps needs to be filled there, but I would venture that they could have gotten Jack Campbell at 34. I would be surprised. I wouldn't bet against you there. And you have needs all across your defensive line, especially on the interior. I know. Can we agree that Texans won the draft? We will get there, Donovan. They had a terrific draft, D'Amico Ryans. Safety needs, I think they may address safety in one of those. Brian Branch out there. But receiver for me, you could have gotten wide receiver 1, your choice at 18. And we would have forgiven you for Jahmyr Gibbs. Fans love skill position players taken in drafts. Gibbs, okay, maybe not a need, maybe a luxury. Receiver at 18 for me was the play. And then in a lean interior defensive line draft, maybe that's what you do in round 2. Jack Campbell would have been there, safety. Round 1, offense. Round 2, defense would have been a nice, clean draft. Now to Donovan's question. Sean King, go Ravens. Yeah, they had a hell of a
Yeah, mate. Go Ravens.
Houston Texans go 2 and 3. We knew CJ Stroud was the likeliest pick there. They were flirting with the thought of going elsewhere, maybe trading back. They ended up taking the best pocket passer for my money in the draft. He's not. I think Bryce Young was QB1. I had Stroud QB2. Will Anderson, perhaps the best player in the draft, and one NFC executive said he is the most surefire, career pro in this draft, even more so than any of the QBs. D'Amico Ryans gets him. They fill needs at quarterback and at edge rusher. For the Texans, they go 2 and 3. They gave up their second-round pick to do it, so now it's going to be quiet for them until round 3. But then you can just take flyers after that because they still have, by my math, 10 picks left, 11 picks left, 4, 5, 10 picks remaining. So,
look, I think, again, don't want to slam drafts this early in the. You get taken back by some selections. You get overly hyped for some, but I think it was very cute with the Texans what they did. It was so clearly a one for you, one for me situation there. All right, especially you got your incoming head coach. You're very happy to have acquired in D'Amico Ryans, and clearly the defensive side of the ball has been his strength and been his background back from when he's playing in the league and had and having a very decorated career. But the one for you, one for me there. It just sets. It's such a clear page turner for this franchise. It is an absolute signifier that, look, this is a roster restart. We're setting up some we're setting up some cornerstones, some pillars on both sides of the ball. And I think when you look at, when it comes to someone like Will Anderson, who would have been the number 1 overall pick if he was able to go into the draft last year, and so much production. His name has been in headlights for so long that you do get to the point where you start to overanalyze, especially with, yes, he's got high upside, but when they start to be seen as these very clean and very clean prospects, very safe prospects, people say, oh, how much bend does he really have? And you're like, well, have a look at the length, the speed, the way he breaks down the corner and attacks. There's enough flexibility there to certainly attack the edge and be a double-digit sack guy. But it's the football character as well. He's highly, highly regarded in that sense. And for everything that roster has gone through the past few years, the turnover at head coaches, their former franchise quarterback, all of that, seemingly, down to what happened in week 17, 18, week 18 last year. I'm still having to get used to saying that in the regular season, where the number one pick was wrestled away from them by their own hands by Lovie Smith to the Chicago Bears, Lovie Smith being the former Chicago Bears head coach. Remember that drama, all that. This is just a very clean, strong, and decisive step forward for a franchise that absolutely needs it.
And let's pump the brakes though on it, because it is a lean division. Tennessee's regressing. Indianapolis is not in a 1-year fix-it situation. Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew is going to be their QB1 in week 1. And what's that make? 8 straight seasons in which their week 1 QB is a different guy. Loads of needs for the Colts. The Jags should run away with that division. But the Texans still, a lot of needs at wide receiver, some needs at corner, middle linebacker. They can address those later in the draft, but I think it's unrealistic to think this team's going to win more than 6 games next season in Houston, even with an easy schedule and a decent division. And that bodes very well then for Arizona, who has the Texans' first-round pick for next year.
All right, moving on, Phil. Let's see. Are there any other teams whose efforts, and not everybody, look, it's quite easy. We've talked about the Eagles so far. We've talked about the Detroit Lions. We've talked about the Texans. It's quite easy to get heavy grades one way or the other when you do boast that capital. We've got, we had a question coming in saying the New England Patriots, a comment coming in through Twitter saying the New England Patriots crushed round 1. Look, I think you got to be happy when you move back and still get an elite talent who fits such an obvious need for size at cornerback, at Christian Gonzalez, but any other picks that jumped out to you before perhaps we pass on a few more critical grades to some of the round 1 combatants?
I'm going to say Seattle. Seattle at 5. Thank you, Denver. Getting Devin Witherspoon, who's just, a lockdown corner with everything but his height. 5'11", I believe he is, 5'11 and a half. He'll be on Tinder saying he's 6 feet. He allowed 3.3 yards per attempt last season, which is, as good as it gets. Get him at 5, best corner in the class, to pair with Tariq Woolen, who has traits you just can't replicate at 4.26 with a 6'4" frame. And then they get Jackson Smith-Njigba, a possession receiver, to pair against DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Jackson Smith-Njigba had some breakout games for Ohio State. And even last year, you can make the case most Saturdays he was their best receiver. Geno Smith, I still think he has a limited ceiling, but Seattle, for their 2 first-round picks, they did as well as you could have, taking 2 in the top 20.
It just makes so much sense with how DK Metcalf and how Tyler Lockett play the game, and the lack of slot and third receiver production that they have had looking to that. And not just from the quote unquote receiver spot, but tight end has obviously been a pretty up and down lack of consistent production at that spot for a while, despite the different names they've thrown at the position. This does make a whole bunch of sense, getting someone like Jackson Smith-Njigba in there, and Devin Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. Talk about an identity, talk about a clear path to what type of football Pete Carroll wants from his secondary. That leaps off. Looking through the rest of the draft and some of those picks that really do jump off. From a name standpoint, the Saints taking Brian Bresee. Is that how we pronounce it? Bresee is just an easy tick over to Breeze in that city, which I think might be appropriate. And I love the last pick of the draft here today. The Kansas City Chiefs always looking to improve the pass rush there. Continue to give Spags some weapons to work with when it's time to light up the opposition quarterback, and getting Felix Anudike-Uzomah, a hometown kid from the area, originally played his football at Kansas State. This is someone who will not stop trying. There's lovely athleticism to work with there. There's a variety of pass rush moves. I looked at him, and I'm hoping this is, you can gauge the vision and the motif I'm trying to put here. I wrote down that he was a Yum Cha rusher. And I meant that in that he's going to bring you a whole bunch of options really, really fast, just like you get at a good yum cha luncheon. Lots of things coming at you. That's his pass rush thing. I'm throwing this at you. I'm going to work into this. And I'm going to bring it over and over and over again with relentless motor pursuit. There'll be effort sacks. There'll be straight up win sacks. I think it's a fantastic addition at that point. You love the hometown connection, but for value, he was one of the players that I had written under with red bold text right underneath his name where I wanted to see him go. And Kansas City, I think, landed an absolute home run there to finish. All right, we're being nice now. It's time to turn and be a little more critical. We've mentioned the Lions already. We've hinted at another team in the mid-20s that we're a little confused by. Would you like to pass any more critical impressions of first-round returns from some of these 31 teams? Or 31 picks, I should say.
Well, I mean, is there somewhere you'd like to go other than Dallas?
We can go there. We can go there. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, at that pick, you and I were live discussing all this, in our Twitter DMs and everywhere we were talking, you wanted Kincaid to the Cowboys. I'm fine with Michael Mayer. I know he's not a burner, but I watched a lot of him at Notre Dame. He seemed to get the ball in his hands a lot. You raised the point that Jason Witten's skill set and his attributes may not work in today's NFL as well as they did. I don't know, man. I saw Michael Mayer be able to block, be able to catch. He was a complete player. And I'm not saying he was my number one tight end. He wasn't. It was Kincaid. But I think a team's going to be very happy with him. Interior defensive line, right before he was chosen, Louis Riddick said, hey, interior defensive line is a need, but Mozzie Smith's out there way too early to take him. And it was as soon as he said that, here comes the selection. And people are reaching, in my opinion, saying this guy's the next Dontari Poe. I'm happy to be wrong. I listen. I wish all these young men well, but just the fact of the matter is, some of them are going to pan out, some aren't. I had a lot of friends in college who were great dudes, not good football players. And Mozzie Smith is a mountain of a man. He offers you nothing in the pass rush. He's strong as all get out, but yeah, man, I don't see him as a top 30 pick. And for me, the Cowboys, with their needs, interior offensive line, tight end, running back, I think they would have preferred to trade out at that point once they got jumped, but they let themselves get jumped. I don't think they were proactive in trying to move up once all their tight ends were still there. And it cost them. I think it cost them. And now they're in a point where they have to just look further down the draft as we get to, pick 58 when they choose again.
Look, I think cornerback was, adding another corner. I know they brought in Stephon Gilmore on a great veteran trade, not giving up much draft capital, but that's not a long-term solution. They are going to come up with a contract situation with Trayvon Diggs in not too long. Very happy with Deron Bland that they uncovered with the day 3 pick last year, who stepped up with a handful of interceptions in his rookie season, some nice coverage work. To kind of more natural is probably that nickel slot corner. But yeah, I think getting jumped for Kincaid, seeing some of those cornerbacks come off the board ahead of time. I know they were keen on Emmanuel Forbes. He didn't get within Kui. With the Commanders I loved Emmanuel Forbes, put the 166 pounds to the sides, physical in the run game, super clean, aggressive cornerback with great feel.
Sixes in his career.
It's the NCAA record for pick sixes, and it's not a fluke because he did it in high school as well. He's had something like 30 interceptions. I think I read in the Dane Brugler Draft Beast Guide. I think he had 30 interceptions since his last 3 years of high school. So he's been ultra prolific. So those players coming off the board, Mozzie Smith, I feel a little responsible because a month ago when I was watching him, I may have tweeted out, I just want the Cowboys to draft Mozzie Smith so that we can have the headline Mazzy Star, which may be a callback to some, indie tunes of way back when. I think there's athleticism there. Clearly, there's power there. He moves well. There's a lot of traits you like there at 323 pounds. Incredibly strong. This is definitely more the two gapping game film that you see. You see a lot of time at the line of scrimmage. You see a lot of absorbing of blocks. Whether they feel like they can tap into more of that athleticism, and there's a little, 0 tech, 1 tech, 3 tech flex inside. We will see. I can say Micah Parsons was very, very pleased with this pick. He was on a live show, and once the pick came in, he stood up and showed a text message where earlier that day, I think he had texted Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator, saying DT Michigan. And Dan Quinn had replied saying, "I'm all about that life," with half a dozen exclamation marks, apparently. So I think the vibes in the Cowboys building are good. And look, I felt a certain way after Tyler Smith from a raw prospect standpoint. I didn't know with Micah Parsons that we were getting edge rusher Micah Parsons, not off-ball linebacker Micah Parsons. The instant reactions that come out with a Dallas pick are normally pretty heavy and pretty strong. I'm willing to sit back here and say, okay, they see an athletic profile, position in need, clearly some talent there. I think the Cowboys, while they may not have earned our trust from coming off back-to-back double-digit win seasons and playoffs, they haven't earned trust in terms of handling success and stacking it year on year on year on year over the past couple of decades. Over the past decade itself, early drafting, they've been about the best in the league. I think it's eight all pros / pro bowlers that they've drafted with their first round picks in the past decade. I think skipping a year with the Amari Cooper trade. And of course, the last time they drafted a defensive lineman from the University of Michigan, one Taco
Charlton. Yeah. But the pipeline to South Bend was set up. Julius Jones, Anthony Fasano, Zach Martin, Jalen Smith, Michael Mayer. Man, it was for me. That's where I would have gone if they weren't able to trade out, which it seems as though they weren't.
But I think if they truly had, I think they went. Jerry Jones been known to flash the entire board. Their draft board, like their grades, at post round one press conferences, which he did last year, and at which point journalists took a photo and did some forensic work to figure out what it was. They said they had 14 first round picks and Muzzy Smith was 11th. We will see. There could be absolute liberal amounts of mayonnaise being poured on that.
Right?
A little bit of mayo on that, perhaps. But the positions that they do have, getting another running back, getting a tight end, looking at the corner spot. If they want to add another edge rusher to that mix, those are the positions that just happen to stretch. Interior offensive line, that could be a little more of a concern, but it wasn't an overwhelming amount of names called on the offensive line. And there could be, there will be talent there, whether you're into day 2 and day 3, whether you're looking at the Zavalas and the Bradfords of the world. But an interesting start for Dallas. Old me may not have turned up for the show and had a bit of a hissy fit, but more mature 30s me, or mid-ish 30s, early mid-30s-ish me, is taking a slightly more reserved approach for a front office, and particular Will McClay and his scouting department, that have earned a bit of trust and leeway when it comes to their returns.
Yeah, but what's the gold standard in Dallas, man? It's not.
Would you stop trying to make me cry? I can see I'm trying to behave maturely, and you were over there with your needles out, just trying to egg me along to blow up Deluxe. How was the Broncos pick?
It's terrific. Nothing going on until 67 because that went to the Seahawks and it ended up being Devin Witherspoon. And given Denver's needs, they could have gone with the corner.
Yeah, how do you think Witherspoon would have looked across from Patrick Surtain?
He would have been terrific.
Okay, cool.
Right now, their opposite corner is Damari Mathis, who's a fine third-round pick from Pittsburgh. But yeah, Denver, I will say, there isn't like a glaring, overarching position of weakness. It's just they're not very good. Interior offensive line, edge rusher. But now they're going to get project interior offensive line, project edge rusher.
We're coming back tomorrow, mate. We're coming back tomorrow for, if you don't
know, Spears, baby.
We will be back tomorrow. We still got more today, but just so you do know, as your weekend kicks off, if you missed summer round 2, you're watching round 2, round 3, day 2, we're hopping on for some live day 2 picks around 12:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So that's Melbourne, Sydney time. I have no idea about the rest of the nation at this point. But we're hopping on around 12:30. We're going to chat it up as round 3 comes to a close, recap day 2, and really look at where these franchises are at after the crux of the premium draft capital has been spent. Okay, so we've talked about some teams. Any other teams disappointed? We've certainly touched on Dallas and Detroit at nauseum. Anyone else? I know you were a little interested with what Cincy did. I think, there were some other positions that might have jumped out, but it's a very Cincinnati pick to take Miles Murphy.
I don't want to harp on it. They've had some success with Clemson guys. Miles Murphy, edge rusher, end of round 1. A lot of things to like. Their offensive line could have used some bolstering, but I don't think there was an obvious choice there. Tight end is the one for me, where I think maybe Cincinnati perhaps should have gone with either Mayer or Musgrove from Oregon State, the guy who's the former slalom speaker.
Luke Musgrave. We love Luke Musgrave in this show. Luke Musgrave, as far as I'm concerned, and I am speaking for Phil wildly, is the tight end 2 on the board after Dalton Kincaid. I actually don't know if that's true. Phil probably disagrees. I had Kincaid, Musgrave, and Mayer. But he's sitting there. Big Luke Musgrave out of the Oregon State University. It is Oregon State University, right? My brain hasn't completely fizzled just yet. That's a whole lot of athleticism and go get the ball, has some blocking upside as well, certainly has some nastiness to his game. And what do you like about him, Phil? You holiday in the same places perhaps during the winter? Get a little winter sport action in together, you and Luke Musgrave?
I am an avid skier.
I'm not.
And I saw his tape before I knew that story. And I'm like, man, there's something unique about his route running, how low he gets, how his hips are kind of like oily. And that, for me, like I was like, once I saw champion slalom skier, it was like, okay, yep, that's it. That's his his rare cross sport athlete. He's terrific at it. And he just offers something that's unique. Now he has a little bit of an injury concern. He doesn't have
cleared the medicals. He cleared the medicals combined. And there's
he
medical
doesn't have
concerns in his medical
tape, as does a Michael Mayer.
When you look at, and my concern with Michael Mayer is just how much, when you look at the most dominant tight ends in the league, how the profiles they fit from an athletic standpoint, and they are, whether you like looking at mock draftable and the kind of spider charts that they have and the shape, how big the kind of map shape of their athletic testing is, or there's RAS scores, or there's you've got our ESPN analytics, you've got all sorts of metrics out there that show, or do you just like the straight up and down combine measurables? There's athletic profiles that translate so strongly to who emerges as dominant tight ends in the NFL. And Mayer doesn't hit a lot of those thresholds. He is a good, not great athlete. He's a good, average to good athlete.
4.65 40 or 4.7 40, 4.7 40. Decent written.
He didn't jump out of the building, but he's incredibly strong. He's detailed as a route runner. He's not just a good or great route runner. He's detailed. He throws in those old man. That's when people talk about Witten. He throws in those old man jinks and hip shakes and just the subtleties where he sets up his body going into breaks. He is a box out merchant in the paint. You will not go through him. He has strong hands, contested catch. Look, he's going to be a very good player. There is an interesting question for how good the pedigree is coming out of Notre Dame, how that translates to some of the hyper athleticism we see at that position when you think of the Kittles and the Kelseys of the world in 2023. I cannot believe it went by so fast, that first round, but it wasn't so much the picks were flying by. It was the action that was flying by, because every pick seemed to have a trade or a drop back or a murmur or a narrative being busted or a surprise. That I will confess that I'm feeling a little bit spent. I know it's only 3:17 in the afternoon. And there's definitely, for me, it's Lord knows what hour it is for you. Let's look at who's left on the board, and perhaps not just the big names, but when we look at the start of the second round, and I can refresh your mind.
No, I got it up. I've been
looking
at notes on my phone the whole time.
Look,
Pittsburgh leads off. Joey Porter Jr. should just move hats from State College, Pennsylvania, 2 hours down the road to Pittsburgh. That's what he should do.
To the franchise his dad played for.
Too easy. I mean, they got Patrick Peterson in the offseason, Akella Witherspoon.
They got a need.
Corner.
They got Peterson, but they got a need, and they got a need for
their needs are tackle, Broderick Jones, and now corner, Joey Porter Jr. That should happen. It's like Bryce Young. We should know the whole time where that was going. Arizona next. Best defensive lineman available.
Just best player. Just best football player.
Yeah, you could argue they have the worst roster top to bottom in the NFL. I don't think I'm overstating that either. Defensively, they're a shambles. They
especially when you look at a team like
Byron Murphy.
You look at a team like the Texans that do have there's pieces on that defense. You look at secondary, and there's a number of you and me loved a bit of Jalen Petrie in recent draft, and throwing the Derek Stingley's. There is, I believe, they added Jimmy Ward in free agency as well.
They did.
They have some pieces there. Arizona is depleted, so it's just talent. It's just talent adding that there.
But you haven't with all the needs. Will Levis being out there does make things interesting. It puts Arizona in a position of potentially trading again. And we've seen that Monty Ossenfort is keen. So if Detroit, LA, Seattle, Vegas, any of those teams that we said, hey, maybe they'll take a project QB in the first round. If you told any of them they're getting Will Levis in the second round, that changes things. And you don't need to give up as much draft capital to move 5 spots from 38 to 33 in the Raiders instance as you would from 7 to 2.
The Tennessee Titans aren't that far away at pick 41.
Yeah.
And there's not, it's not, I think one of the most comparable the most common comparables and links and player comps and stuff. I've said comps so many times in the last 7 words. For Will Levis, there's a lot of Carson Wentz talk, but there is also, getting him into kind of that heavy, some of that play action stuff and getting him under center. That's not dissimilar from what you do see from a Ryan Tannehill with Tennessee. That's not a far stretch to get there with the strong arm and you being able to really push the ball in those situations. So Tennessee loom there. I mean, the Saints are at pick 40. They did just invest in Derek Carr, but you never know what the Saints are going to do. So I think, the Cardinals could be in a fantastic spot, just sitting there right in front of Detroit, in a fantastic spot to take control of day 2 of the draft right off the top there. When we are looking at some of the other best available players, because I think Joey Porter Jr. and Will Levis really jump off. We've talked about Michael Mayer already. He's going to make somebody very happy. We talked about some of the tight ends. I think at this value point, Hendon Hooker, of course, we're going to start getting into some more of these wide receivers coming off the board.
I love these second-round wide receivers.
This is where the value felt right with you.
Josh Downs. DeJuan Jones is an interesting tackle prospect. I know you're not high on him. I am. Tuli Tuipulotu. I got to say, cleaner in the year. Guy is so fluid out there, and he's somebody who, has the opportunity. And, buddy, my weight room pal, Zach Charbonnet.
That's little light Run DMC light, Darren McFadden light. We love a little Charbonnet in here. We should talk about your weight room pal, Lucas Van Ness, who you were a fan of, and I wasn't. Going to the Green Bay Packers. I have, and I'm not going to show it on here, but I have another friend of mine named Phil, who is a Green Bay Packers fan who had the camera set up, bold as it was, to videotape his reaction as the Packers made their pick, hoping that they'd moved in front of the New England Patriots as a Jackson Smith and Jigba play, or at worst, go get one of these tight end weapons like a Dalton Kincaid at that spot. And when they go and grab another defensive player, the emotion, the blood, the verve for draft day life really sapped out of him. It was quite something to behold. Certainly one I've got saved to the video file there. Look, the interior offensive lineman didn't move. We didn't see the centers go. Whether you're a John Michael Schmitz man,
Joe Tippmann,
whether you're a Steve Avila guy, or Cyrus Torrance is still there. There was some murmurs that my guy out of Syracuse, who little Bergeron, may have got some love later on day. There you go. That he may have got some love. So there's this. I'm looking forward to this day 2, day 3, or day 2 rounds 2 and 3 crop that we've got sitting there. And
this is where you get quirky, though. These are where the guys where it's like there's some significant red flag that you got to make the decision: are you overlooking it or not?
Yeah.
Travius Hodges-Tomlinson. I mean, you watch him on tape, dude is breaking up passes left and right, but people keep throwing his way because he's 5'7" as a corner. He keeps showing up. Is that going to work in the NFL? I don't know. But we're going to find out. Some team's going to
talk about quirky. How many teeth does your offensive lineman need? Cody Mock is out there waiting for someone to come calling. Brian Branch, super smart, versatile Alabama defender. Heard that before. I saw him play overhang defender, box safety, free safety, split safety, outside corner, nickel corner. I think I might have seen him line up as a wing T running back at some point. That may be a lie. Like that type of talent sitting there, I think some teams are going to make themselves so much better on day 2. And then, of course, we've got to bring up, some folks call him Tommy for short, but Adebaware, and I think I butchered that terribly. I'm not sure how good that was.
He did fine.
He did fine. The athletic potential of this defensive end out of Northwestern, who would want to see pushed inside to the 3 technique, who all his best snaps and pass rush wins came at 3 technique. He went to the Senior Bowl, and they put him there. If
Arizona doesn't trade their pick, that's who I think they should take.
I mean, that guy has upside. And again, I like that, right? He was getting hyped. You could say he had definitely had day 2 tape. Maybe he had round 3 tape, but the testing was first round. Just adjusting that perspective and adjusting that level of expectation by him now being a day 2 pick, I think is so healthy for the way he enters the league, because you do hate to start hearing teams, when they do take an upside player who isn't so proven, is going to need some time and some seasoning, maybe a slight positional shift. The impatient impatience from the press, media, the fan base, even those inside the locker room or inside the building can start to build up with that first round tag on you. This is more natural fit for him. I mean, I'm just looking at these names. I mean, BJ Ojolari just sitting there. There's so much there in that.
BJ Ojolari.
So, his brother Z's already in the league pass rushing for the New York Giants.
Yeah, so the laziest player comp I've ever seen.
What? Did someone really do that?
Yeah, I want to. I'm gonna check right now because again, I want to say it was NFL.com.
Oh, we're not being too mean.
No. NFL.com did Harold Landry, which actually isn't terrible.
Okay. Yeah, you can see that.
Yeah, he's a 3-4 stand-up guy only. So you got to look at teams with a 3-4 fit. Your Atlanta, your Baltimore, not Buffalo. They're 4-3. Carolina, you can go through and see teams.
He's another high motor edge rusher with length and some speed and the traits you like there. And they gave him, I believe, that number 18 jersey at LSU, which doesn't always point to success in the NFL, but it is a sign from them, the respect that he carried in the locker room. And then for you fantasy, fiends out there, the folks that love their fantasy football, and I count myself absolutely amongst them, tomorrow is going to be a big running back day. We saw two go between the 5 pick span of 8 to 12, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, inclusive maths. That's the number 5. We saw 2 running backs come off the board, but this running back class is absolutely stacked. And it is a pick your flavor, ice cream flavor, choose your adventure ride there with the backs. You mentioned Run DMC light, Darren McFadden light, and Zach Charbonnet. If you make a wine pun after saying Charbonnet, that's a knock. That's not against you.
But he is somebody when he, can get through the defense, get across the goal line at UCLA. I did read on a highlight on SportsCenter that he had a smooth, buttery finish.
Well, and you know what? I'll stand for that. That's, but that's enough. No more. No, what is it? Cabernet Charbonnet that I've seen, or Charbonnet Blanc. You got the likes of Devon Achane. I really like Zach Evans, Tank Bigsby, who I see some Arian Foster to his game. You mentioned Tajay Spears before. Roshan Johnson, who is just a mobile fridge with third down capabilities. The man has that old school running back. We talked about it, early 2000s look with the thin armbands that just make his already impressive frame look even more muscular and imposing. Kendra Miller out of TCU. There are so many running backs waiting to get. So for the fantasy fans out there, big eyes on where these backs land and the opportunities that may arise for a rare talent. Look, running back is always pretty deep, but this is a phenomenal class.
Yeah, Tajay Spears, Zach Charbonnet, a lot of these guys too.
Dwayne McBride.
We kind of say, oh, well, I value them higher than they're graded, but that's because it's considered such a replaceable position in today's NFL. And that's the reality of it. But Bijan Robinson is somebody who I think bucks that trend. And I think he's somebody who, for all your dynasty, fantasy leagues, that's the guy that's going to be first off everybody's board. But Laws, it's
go get him some
more to
offensive
discuss
line
tomorrow.
help.
Twice the picks tomorrow as fast as today went, it's going to double in speed tomorrow.
It is. We didn't talk about Anthony Richardson yet. Do we need to do that before we go?
Sure. The question is, can he be functionally accurate in the NFL? His tape is a roller coaster. You throw on Utah A&M, you're thinking this guy is Cam Newton. He throws on the run like Patrick Mahomes. You throw on Kentucky or South Florida tape, it's maybe he should be benched. It's wide of a gap.
We talked about the Georgia defenders that have come off the board to a certain team based in Pennsylvania already. You throw on the Georgia tape, and there are some phenomenal throws there. Some completed and some incompleted. Let's be honest, he was not dealing with the greatest wide receiving core there in Florida. There are some confusing, I'm not sure if we call them routes being run by some of his receiving core there, but the talent's amazing. The arm talent is phenomenal. He can hit every blade of grass. He was charged with a lot at the line of scrimmage as well, with setting protections and audibles. That was part of what was put on his plate. He's super young, and yes, people see such a small amount of live snap action in games played, and they immediately get callbacks to the likes of Mitch Trubisky, but he is only 20. If you can give him some seasoning, he's had a lot put on his plate at that level and has produced some pretty impressive tape at times. Yes, there's some inconsistency. I think, lower body mechanics, keeping the footwork, consistent and clean. And not to mention, he was behind a bad offensive line there. He was running just to save the play, trying to go through reads, and you can't get to read 2 because you're already being buried into the turf by the pass rush is not an easy way to live. But all right, we covered Anthony Richardson. we should get out of here. Phil, as I always say, or as I convolutedly sometimes mix a metaphor about, time to land the spaceship. Get us out of here until we return in less than 24 hours time. What about 21 hours time? And we'll be back on
we got
chatting
to
away.
if we're gonna interrupt round 3.
Mhm.
But I mean that's how it's gonna happen. It's gonna be very fast tomorrow. We're gonna try and digest it, keep it organized. I mean, just to tell you guys, I have profiles for each team. I have depth charts for each team. I have profiles for each player. Laws has a terrific system as well. We are just trying to be conduits of the conversation. So come back tomorrow, same time. Ask some questions. Let's get involved, and I mean, celebrate the little sliver of time we have in the NFL offseason where there aren't games to be played, but NFL to discuss.
Absolutely.
So with that, Laurie, I think it's time we say farewell.
It is. We say goodbye. And I'll see what type of shirt I can bring for you tomorrow. The controversial spots today. We'll see what I might have rustled up. It's day 2. It's a lot of fun draft picks to be made. The Cowboys Letterman jacket may come out of the closet.